he would agree to take a much smaller sum, saying we were all poor men, and the most we could possibly raise would not exceed $2,000. Finding that he was much exasperated at my expostulations, I embraced the offer of writing to inform my commander of our unfortunate situation, though there appeared not the least probability of relieving us. They said the letter should be conveyed to Macao in a fishing boat, which would bring an answer in the morning. A small boat accordingly came alongside and took the letter. About 6 o'clock in the evening they gave us some rice and a little salt fish, which we ate, and they made signs for us to lay down on the deck to sleep. But such numbers of Ladrones were constantly coming from different vessels to see us and examine our clothes and hair, they would not allow us a moment's quiet. They were particularly anxious for the buttons of my coat, which were new, and as they supposed gold. I took it off and laid it on the deck to avoid being disturbed by them. It was taken away in the night, and I saw it on the next day stripped of its buttons. About 9 o'clock a boat came and hailed the chief's vessel. He immediately hoisted his mainsail, and the fleet weighed apparently in great confusion. They worked to windward all night and part of the next day, and anchored about 1 o'clock in a bay under the island of Lantau, where the head admiral of Ladrones was lying at anchor, with about 200 vessels and a Portuguese brig they had captured a few days before, and murdered the captain and part of the crew. Saturday the 23rd, early in the morning, a fishing boat came to the fleet to inquire if they had captured an European boat. Being answered in the affirmative, they came to the vessel I was in. One of them spoke a few words of English, and told me he had a Ladrone pass, and was sent by Captain K in search of us. I was rather surprised to find he had no letter. He appeared to be well acquainted with the chief, and remained in his cabin, smoking opium and playing cards all the day. In the evening I was summoned with the interpreter before the chief. He questioned us in a much milder tone, saying he now believed we were Englishmen, a people he wished to be friendly with, and that if our captain would lend him $70,000 till he returned from his cruise up the river, he would repay him, and send us all to Macao. I assured him it was useless writing on those terms, and unless our ransom was speedily settled, the English fleet would sail, and render our enlargement altogether ineffectual. He remained determined, and said if it were not sent, he would keep us and make us fight, or put us to death. I accordingly wrote, and gave my letter to the man belonging to the boat before mentioned. He said he could not return with an answer in less than 5 days. The chief now gave me the letter I wrote when first taken. I have never been able to ascertain his reasons for detaining it, but suppose he dared not negotiate for our ransom without orders from the head admiral, who I understood was sorry at our being captured. He said the English ships would join the Mandarines and attack them. He told the chief that captured us to dispose of us as he pleased. Monday the 24th it blew a strong gale, with constant hard rain. We suffered much from the cold and wet, being obliged to remain on deck with no covering but an old mat, which was frequently taken from us in the night by the Ladrones who were on watch. During the night the Portuguese who were left in the brig murdered the Ladrones that were on board of her, cut the cables, and fortunately escaped through the darkness of the night. I have since been informed they ran her on shore near Macao. Tuesday the 25th at daylight in the morning, the fleet, amounting to about 500 sail of different sizes, weighed to proceed on their intended cruise up the rivers to levy contributions on the towns and villages. It is impossible to describe what were my feelings at this critical time, having received no answers to my letters, and the fleet under way to sail, hundreds of miles up a country never visited by Europeans, there to remain probably for many months, which would render all opportunities of negotiating for our enlargement totally ineffectual, as the only method of communication is by boats that have a pass from the Ladrones, and they dare not venture above 20 miles from Macao, being obliged to come and go in the night, to avoid the Mandarines, and if these boats should be detected in having any intercourse with the Ladrones, they are immediately put to death, and all their relations, though they had not joined in the crime, share in the punishment, in order that not a single person of their family should be left to imitate their crimes or revenge their death. This severity renders communication both dangerous and expensive. No boat would venture out for less than 100 Spanish dollars. Wednesday the 26th, at daylight, we passed in sight of our ships at anchor under the island of Chun Po. The chief then called me. pointed to the ships, and told the interpreter to tell us to look at them, for we should never see them again. About noon we entered a river to the westward of the Bogue, 3 or 4 miles from the entrance. We passed a large town situated on the side of a beautiful hill, which is tributary to the Ladrones. The inhabitants saluted them with songs as they passed. The fleet now divided into 2 squadrons, the red and the black, and sailed up different branches of the river. At midnight the division we were in anchored close to an immense hill, on the top of which a number of fires were burning, which at daylight I perceived proceeded from a Chinese camp. At the back of the hill was a most beautiful town, surrounded by water and embellished with groves of orange trees. The chop house, custom house, and a few cottages were immediately plundered and burned down. Most of the inhabitants, however, escaped to the camp. The Ladrones now prepared to attack the town with a formidable force, collected in rowboats from the different vessels. They sent a messenger to the town, demanding a tribute of $10,000 annually, saying if these terms were not complied with, they would land, destroy the town, and murder all the inhabitants, which they would certainly have done had the town laid in a more advantageous situation for their purpose. But being placed out of the reach of their shot, they allowed them to come to terms. The inhabitants agreed to pay $6,000, which they were to collect by the time of our return down the river. This finesse had the desired effect, for during our absence they mounted a few guns on a hill which commanded the passage, and gave us in lieu of the dollars a warm salute on our return. October the 1st, the fleet weighed in the night, dropped by the tide up the river, and anchored very quietly before a town surrounded by a thick wood. Early in the morning the Ladrones assembled in rowboats and landed, then gave a shout and rushed into the town, sword in hand. The inhabitants fled to the adjacent hills, in numbers apparently superior to the Ladrones. We may easily imagine to ourselves the horror with which these miserable people must be seized, on being obliged to leave their homes and everything dear to them. It was a most melancholy sight to see women in tears, clasping their infants in their arms, and imploring mercy for them from those brutal robbers. The old and the sick, who were unable to fly or to make resistance, were either made prisoners or most inhumanly butchered. The boats continued passing and repassing from the junks to the shore, in quick succession, laden with booty, and the men besmeared with blood. 250 women and several children were made prisoners and sent on board different vessels. They were unable to escape with the men, owing to that abominable practice of cramping their feet. Several of them were not able to move without assistance. In fact, they might all be said to totter rather than walk. 20 of these poor women were sent on board the vessel I was in. They were hauled on board by the hair, and treated in a most savage manner. When the chief came on board, he questioned them respecting the circumstances of their friends, and demanded ransoms accordingly, from $6,000 to $600 each. He ordered them a berth on deck, at the after part of the vessel, where they had nothing to shelter them from the weather, which at this time was very variable, the days excessively hot and the nights cold with heavy rains. The town being plundered of everything valuable, it was set on fire, and reduced to ashes by the morning. The fleet remained here 3 days, negotiating for the ransom of the prisoners, and plundering the fish tanks and gardens. During all this time, the Chinese never ventured from the hills, though there were frequently not more than 100 Ladrones on shore at a time, and I am sure the people on the hills exceeded 10 times that number. October the 5th, the fleet proceeded up another branch of the river, stopping at several small villages to receive tribute, which was generally paid in dollars, sugar and rice, with a few large pigs roasted whole, as presents for their joss, the idol they worship. Every person, on being ransomed, is obliged to present him with a pig or some fowls, which the priest offers him with prayers. It remains before him a few hours, and is then divided amongst the crew. Nothing particular occurred till the 10th, except frequent skirmishes on shore between small parties of Ladrones and Chinese soldiers. They frequently obliged my men to go on shore, and fight with the muskets we had when taken, which did great execution, the Chinese principally using bows and arrows. They have matchlocks, but use them very unskilfully. On the 10th, we formed a junction with the Black Squadron, and proceeded many miles up a wide and beautiful river, passing several ruins of villages that had been destroyed by the Black Squadron.